Hey, it's Kisha here with Defending the Early Years podcast. We'll be focusing on amplifying the voices of early childhood educators, advocates, and all of those who love children. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking with Nicollette Sowder. Nicolette is the founder and creator of Wilder Child and Wild Schooling. Hi, Nicolette.
Hi, Lakeisha. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited for this.
I am also excited. I've seen a lot of your posts being shared all through Facebook and all over the place, and read some of your blogs. And I know a little bit about the work that you're doing, but I want you to tell us how this got started and what your passions are and what you're doing out there.
All right. It feels definitely been a journey. And the short of it is that my husband and I moved to Michigan when my daughter was 1. And I had a fairly, nature-based childhood, but but I wasn't surrounded by nature the way that I was when we moved here. So we moved to a farm, and there's 40 acres. And like I said, my daughter was 1, and at first it was just it felt truly isolating to be dominated by nature. And just I was going through some postpartum, and it just felt I didn't know anyone, and it had that whole resonance to it. So that's when I started Wilder Child, because to reflect some of the just unbelievable beauty and the relationship that was unfolding with my daughter and I within the wider context of nature. And I just felt like I had to write about it, because my background and one of my huge passions is writing. So it really did truly start as a mommy blog. I mean, I don't know how else to, what else, that's what it was. And so I still have a lot of respect and love for that space, just something that comes out of the voice, but you just need to get it out there. Right. And then with that, I feel like it just hit it was like in the zeitgeist at the time where nature-based learning was just starting to take off. And so it grew really, really fast. And that's when I realized that there was this other community out there that I could connect with. And then from there, that kind of went on for 4 years. And then my daughter was turning 5, and it was time for her to enter kindergarten. And she, people ask me, like, why did you all decide to homeschool? And it's funny, because I didn't have some big political or big stance around it. I mean, yes, I was studying early childhood development, and I started to see the writing on the walls, but I didn't really have a strong stance on it at that point. It all came from a sensory experience. Just sort of one day, my husband and I were out trying to fix the water lines that had broke on our berry patch, and my daughter was out there dancing in the sunlight. And I just looked at it, and just a deep knowing came over me. I'm like, she can't go into a space where she can't move, because moving, it wasn't just like, oh, I want her to be able to enjoy herself. It was like, I recognize that as a deep need for her in terms of regulating her nervous system. That's how she did it, is through, and that's how children do it. But I recognize that so clearly, and how taking her out of her natural environment also was a part of that relationship, and her being able to regulate and her being able to unfold. So then I created Wild Schooling to reflect just the homeschooling piece of that. Yes. And that started, so that's the, land bonded, there's like land bonded, village led education. And that was the homeschooling component of that. So it's really, and it just started me down this unbelievably rich path of I learned so much about forest schools. And I started to, I'm sorry, once I got my microphone. I started to work as a forest school teacher, and learned, just fell in love with indigenous land bonded community practices, really, which is the heart and soul of and just ancestral practices where I live now. And so it's been amazing. It's been beautiful. The
So,
community, it's been beautiful.
so it started out of just a need that you had to connect with nature and a need that your daughter shared to connect with nature and the connection that you two had together. And then spreading this out in your writing created this community around all of that. Wow. That is deep.
Absolutely. Well,
So
repairing. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
did the writing and the blogging, did that bring you together with a community of locals? Have you been able to connect with um, people where you live as well?
Eventually, it did. I mean, initially, it was so much about healing what had been broken, and like my relationship with nature and myself had
Mm,
been really, I had a lot of healing to do. And I felt like I had to do that. Um, like initially, I had to do that work sort of alone, or I ended up doing it alone. Like it took me a long time to create and form true community, which I think that's like people always want a community. And it takes a lot of work if you have
mhm.
experienced that.
Yes.
Because,
Yes.
our society's not set up to support true community. And so I am kind of looking back, I'm kind of glad I had that time on my own with my kids on the land to be able to truly heal some of those big wounds, because
Mhm.
when we first came, it's really it was this idea of, oh, we're going to come and like heal the land, right? And
Mhm.
obviously the land ended up
Healed
healing
you.
us. Like
Yes.
it's an incredible consumptive way um, to look at our environment, which ends up happening a lot in outdoor ed. People come to it and they just start consuming it. You're using it as a backdrop to your
Mm,
activities as opposed to building that relationship, which takes
yeah.
time.
Yeah, that deep connection. And you're right, time. And time is something that as a society, we don't really have much respect for. Everything's so rushed and all of our time is used up. Um, I know that one big component to your work is the slowing down, just taking
Mm.
taking the time. How are you able to support families and children with that process of slowing down?
I think by supporting that process within myself, it all starts with my own attunement. Like, why
Mhm.
am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I moving the way that I'm moving? Like, that embodied healing had to come first for me before I could recognize, like, I had to do some deprogramming around
Mhm.
education. I was in the traditional classroom. I taught eighth grade and I taught high school, and so I came in, and obviously 12 years of compulsory schooling. I
Yeah.
came in with a lot of preconceived notions, some that worked and some that, you're taking an environment that's happening inside of four walls and you're trying to push it into a very dynamic, diverse environment that is constantly shifting. Like they're very different. Like when you're
Mhm.
teaching outside versus
Yeah.
in, it's very different. And so in order to slow down, I first had to slow down myself and say, how did I come to where I am right now? And even
Mhm.
now, before I step out with a group of kids, I still slow myself and get attuned to their world first. Like it
Mm.
is like a sinking in, and I know you know what I'm talking about. Like there's just
Yes.
like a tuning up, right?
Yes. I call it melting in, where you just
I love it. I
really
love it.
and that came from me observing one of our teachers and just watching the way that she her body language was with the
Mm,
children when she literally looked like she was like melting into the moment with them and nothing else mattered
mm,
outside of that moment with them. And observing her in that way with children forever changed the way that I was with children after that. So I definitely get what you mean when you say the sinking in feeling, the idea of being in tune with yourself first. And that's I often say like this is people work, this is self work. Like
mm.
there's so much that we have to do ourselves before we're with children and during the time that we're with children and after we're with children. It's
Yes.
just this self-work. And then putting Mother Earth, in there with that is such a healing. I love that you use the word healing
Oh, it's
because it's
beautiful. It's a different pace out there. I mean, talk about
mhm,
slowing down.
mhm.
It's everything's operating in a completely different timeline and in a different rhythm, or a rhythm that we know it does sync up with our bodies, but once we've been disconnected from it, it takes time to reconnect to that rhythm. And there's just so much observation that goes on. There's so much stepping back. I remember one of the teachers, and my dear friend who I was observing, she started the forest school, and how she just almost made herself invisible with the kids. Like, it's like, I'm like, where'd you
Yes.
go? she,
Yeah.
but then they sensed her presence. It's like she was there with her presence, but she wasn't, there was just a magic there. And just, I could
Mhm.
just, has so much practice in fading in and fading and coming forward when she needs to.
Yes.
And there's a beauty to it, and there's an art, and it mirrors the way that nature works. Things come in and out of being. There's a flow, there's the wind, there's the sunlight, it comes in and out. So it's
Mhm.
easier as an educator, I think, outside to get attuned. I'm biased, but
Yeah.
that's
But I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think that that's why so many people are out of tune. We're not spending
yeah.
enough time in those spaces. We're not spending enough time slowing down and listening to the world around us and listening to ourselves. So I know that your work is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, has to do a lot with sharing this perspective with families and with parents. And what does that look like? How are you connecting with finding those people who are interested and connecting with those people in ways that support them on this journey?
Some of it happens at the forest school. Some of it happens a lot of it happens online on wild schooling, on Wilder Child, just people constantly reaching out and taking that time with them. Um, and then there was another area I was going to say.
What's the
Yeah,
Moonchild
villages.
Club?
So
Yes,
that,
I want.
so, so
I
the
want to know
kids,
it all.
the Kids Moon Club, that has been massive. And I hesitated to talk about it because I'm at my core, like, I'm an artist, so it's hard to
Hmm.
talk about something that feels like it's being channeled through me, and sort of this baby that is put out there in the universe.
Hmm.
But the more I do try to, it's been such an incredible thing. But the Kids Moon Club is a year-long journey that I help guide families in reconnecting to those cycles and rhythms, so that they can stop, or that they can work on this, like, how we've been trained to come out
Yeah.
and consume. Our
Mm.
relationship with the environment is very ego based. I mean, we go to do something, we
Mhm.
don't go to visit that trusted, relative. Our relationship with the earth is really familial. The more you sink into that, the more it feels like, we're going to visit grandmother tree. This
Yeah.
is kin. It is a part of us. We grow things out of it that then nourish us, that nourish our children. And that deep relational sense of being is what I try to help families sync up with. That it is so difficult. I know, because it's been so difficult for me. I still find myself falling into it sometimes. Like, we're like,
Mhm.
what are we going to be? I mean, what are we going to do? Like,
Do
that's the
yeah.
whole thing, right?
Mhm.
Like, what are we going to do, instead of just going out there and saying hello,
Experience.
greeting,
Yeah.
and being together with a place that we love, which is why we
Mhm.
try to have at least some component of the time meeting over and over and over again on the same piece of land, if that's possible.
Mhm.
Public, private piece of land, city, country, suburbs, it doesn't matter. Just that recognition that children have of, it's like when a child goes to somebody's house for the first time that they don't know. it
Yeah.
takes them a long time
Mhm.
to sink into that experience. But it's just like that with nature. If you go to that same, they're just like, oh, here we are. This is,
Yeah.
I recognize this. The space is
Mhm.
safe for me. And I can sink into that so much.
Yeah, and
So
they
much
start from what they
faster.
already know, right? They
Right,
start
right.
from what they already know with that connection. And then they're also not put off by the changes because every time we go to the forest, it's the same, but it's different, you know? No, this is home base, but now the leaves are gone, you know? You know this is home base, but
Mm.
now there's a blanket of snow on the floor. So there's that sense of knowing, but still that sense of newness and novelty that really keeps pulling children in. And that's what I've noticed when I take children into the forest, just that one, the pace changes. Their ability, kids already can hear and see everything, but their ability sensory wise to take in so much, but in such a pure way, really shines. And their connection with the land, they're remembering, I mean, I've never seen a group of children, I mean, like, it's magical to me. I've never seen in any other space where a group of children can walk into a forest. I mean, everything's green, everything's growing, but they can go straight to the same spot that they were in before and find
Mm,
the same rock. I mean, they really know this land from revisiting and revisiting the same spot. So with
mm.
families, you're talking about forest school program. How often does that meet, and what part of the forest school aspect is your work? So what does that look like?
So for us, it's 2 times a week, but
Mhm.
families can go up to 4 days a week. And for me, I do a lot of the curriculum planning, and I'm just out there with the kids.
Mhm.
Then, and it's so beautiful because like I use the word curriculum loosely.
That was gonna be my next question.
One of the experimental aspects of what we're doing in one of the classes is this village led aspect. So I hear child led a lot, but really traditionally, we would have been, together in some sort of village led environment. So it's your needs are important, but you are a part of, like, everybody's needs are important. And it's this dance between what you like, where the child is leading, but also situating the child within the wider context of the village, so that
Mhm.
they understand that they're part of like a network that will keep them safe, but they also have to like connect to it and be a part of it. And that sort of helps them then when they step out of that environment, they can recognize the wider social community and social fabric.
Yes.
Because we see so many programs, even forest school programs, that it's just you see the adults there, but there's still this element of they're leading this, or they're letting the child lead, but like what is the container that the child is being held in. So we try to invite in elders, community members to do special projects, and they get a special gift when they come. There's a John Young is one of my great teachers, and he talks so much about these processes that are really important to humans, like greeting ceremonies, and that we've
Mm.
completely lost. So we have our felted acorn that we give to any, and we thank the people who come into our environment. We welcome them into our village, into our circle. And then the village songs that we learn are then passed down to the lower groups. So there's this continuum
Mhm.
that is echoed through the entire program.
That is amazing. It's this sense of connection with something larger than yourself. And I think that again, as a society, we're missing that connection to something that's not just you, right? A connection to the larger world around you. So I really love that. I love that aspect of it. Are you finding that families are buying into ideas. I mean, I know it's not the norm,
I'm
it's
laughing because it's hard. It's a leap, you know? It's like, well, um, I think our families are fairly open. Obviously, they would be in, it's alternative. It's an
Mhm.
alternative program, but there are aspects of it that I think could be brought into classrooms.
Yeah.
Like they're definitely and it's a sense of going from the teacher is the lead to I'm part of a community.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it's an unlearning for teachers because no matter how hard we try, we still come from a top down mentality. And so even inviting people in, that's like a big leap, right? Like I'm inviting somebody into my classroom. Like, are they qualified? Do they know my rhythm? Do they know who I am? In a true village, you would have known people. There would be a sense of knowing already, like deep knowing, generational knowing. And so that's something where when you're thinking about it from that, it's not about remaking the village. It's about looking at it and bringing that knowledge and wisdom forward to see how it aligns with where we're currently at. So I'm not saying it's a one-to-one match. I'm not trying to go back in time and like create, villages in the woods. I'm just trying to see where my ego has and where I've been learned to consume and how that has caused me to form my classroom. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of learning to do.
There is. There is. There's so much learning, and I'm learning a lot right now in this conversation. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now,
Thank you.
what if we have some listeners that are currently running forest school programs and currently working with young children out in nature? What would be some advice that you would give them specific to um, a couple things specific to slowing down their programs
Mm.
and connecting more with community and conveying this message to the families that are already in their community and families outside of their community. So those are a lot of questions.
So slowing down when you're in a rhythm. And Waldorf, I don't agree with everything Waldorf's roots, but I do see some of like I see where their take on rhythm has
Hmm.
been really, it feels really right when you match it with nature. And having a gentle rhythm is really beautiful because and it works. It helps slow things down and it keeps the children in a flow because what I see sometimes when I'm visiting other early ed programs is that there's tons of huge expanse of child-led play, but you see kids burning out,
Hmm.
right? And then when you study indigenous cultures, you see that there wasn't like it's that village-led mentality again. Either grandma's leading and there's that expectation, so they, we're going to go pick berries now, and grandma's leading. And this is just traditional indigenous culture. Obviously there's a wide diversity now and you can't make generalizations, but there was a rhythm there um, that slowed down the entire day. It's like it creates a sense of safety and predictability, yet it's connected to nature. So you still like it's still enlivened. It's not like, oh, now we're doing calendar time. It's just actually a lot of the cues are given by nature itself. So the sun is at a certain angle to like grandmother maple. We instinctively know because we live in this environment that it's time to shift into more of a preparation for dinner.
Hmm.
And so,
It really,
yeah.
I don't want to say surprises me, but it really does something to me when I observe a group, and I've noticed this with my group, how they do have this inner, and as a community, this inner rhythm where at certain times in the day, sometimes based on just like you said, I never even thought about it as where the sun is, but based on just certain cues that their body gets at certain
Yes.
times of the day, they just are more. There's times when they gather more, there's times where they slow down more, there's times where they move
Oh,
fast more, there's times where, especially like we did this thing where we stopped years ago, we stopped forcing children to take naps, right? We allowed them
right.
to actually listen to their own bodies.
Right.
And while we were kind of transitioning into this new way of being, we did a lot of intentional observing of like what it looks like as children begin to understand that type of autonomy. And we started noticing the children, just like all humans, had these cycles, these
Mm,
inner cycles where their body would shift from a more active, more physical way of being to down turning to a more
mm,
slow, more sedentary, more dialogue based, more closer to the ground, whether it be, you know, just their bodies would just change, whether it be literally hanging out in the earth. But we saw this again and again and again, day after day after day, week after week after week, that at certain times they would shift in the way that they were, in their speed and their connection to the earth. So there is really something to be said about those rhythms,
mm.
and really paying attention to that. And
Yes. Yes. And that wider, oh, like that. So that's attunement. Like you're
yeah.
attuned to each other. You know, we're attuned to each other on that deep level. And that's so beautiful that you're attuning in that way. You can just feel it. You can feel when they shift. Um, and then I ask myself about the wider communal context of what I'm building, right? So, um, for example, what I'm trying to say is, if we all have to eat, then the rhythm of a child, like I'm going to take that into account when they're getting into their downshift. That's not when we're going to do meal prep,
Mhm.
right? Because that doesn't make any sense, because then you're forcing them out of their natural rhythm. So as a human community, our natural, all those shifts that you're talking about, that like internal rhythm, when it's synced up with a wider, wilder communal context, it's like you're all working in concert together. It's
Mhm.
beautiful. Like you're getting your needs met as an elder, as a I mean as like an adult of like the things that need to get done, and they're getting their needs met because they're in a nourished, they're held within that predictable but unique, fulfilling context. So
Yeah.
it's interesting.
I feel like that's that in those moments, and in those times, that's where the magic is. It just
Oh,
feels it just feels so beautiful. And you mentioned observing someone in the forest who kind of just, you know, feels like they disappear, and then, but they're there at just the right times. I feel like that's the sweet spot. Like
yes.
when you can do that, when you're in that space, that's the art of it. That's the magic of it. And the children can feel that. And I don't
Oh,
feel that anyone can get there without relationship. Like you got to
no.
have such a deep knowing and understanding of the children, and of yourself, to be able to pull off an environment where there's that level of trust, and the children have to have this sense of self-knowing, where they're not constantly looking over their shoulder for what they should be doing, or feeling like there's some sort of product, I'm sorry, not process, definitely a process, some sort of product that they're needing to be, um having turn in out of it. So you talked about curriculum, and you said not in the sense of curriculum that, not in the traditional sense of curriculum. Can you elaborate a little bit on what
Sure. I'll speak
that
to
is?
the early ed piece of it, because I think that that's a larger portion of your audience, and this is also just something I'm in love with, because I've done this program, whatever word you want to use, 3 times. This experience, it was really a journey for the kids. So this was in our 4 to 7s, and we did something called Aki, and that whole program is where we have a gnome. It always starts with the gnome. When you're outside, gotta have a gnome in there. I hope I'm the only guest who ever says, and it starts with the
Starts
gnome.
with a gnome. That is the quote. And it starts with a gnome.
And the idea is to not have themed activities, themed ideas, not units, not something, because in nature, it's so much about emergent culture. And I think that with early ed that's done in the right attuned, nourished way, there's so much about it that's emergent in the relationship, in the interactions, in the environment. It's alive, right?
Yes.
So to create something that's as alive as that, yet still um, can enhance the experience is tricky. But I think with this, after lots of practice and trial with other things, this really has worked wonderfully. So Aki is this forest gnome that the kids come across. It's a statue. It's the cutest thing. I'll send you a pic of it. But they encounter him every class. And part of the rhythm for the time that they're there is some sort of interaction with this gnome. And he leaves letters for them. There's a little bowl that they bring treasures to. So it's not a heavy handed sort of, you have to do this, but Aki is storying the landscape for the children, because when you're out there, what's in our DNA is to story the landscape. So we create stories on the land that we're in. It is one of the most natural things we can do as humans. And Aki helps the children scaffold into that process. So and they're usually caretaking for him. There's a lot of empathy. Like we'll have crocheted a hat and not crochet it all the way, and it has a hole in it, and he leaves a little letter. He's sad that there's a hole in it, and then they help repair it, or they put a little leaf on him. They make their own. Like again, we don't tell them. We just sort of, here's an invitation.
Yeah.
And they end up, so it's interesting.
Is Aki something that you created, or is this a curriculum or an experience that is widely available?
It's something that I created.
Oh, I figured that, but I was like, let me ask. But you are such a creative, you're such a creative spirit. It's wonderful to see and hear all of the many ways that you've connected children and families with nature and with themselves. It's amazing.
Well, I'm inspired by all the loam lore of like the Scandinavian gnome lore, and the indigenous like ideas of the people who are in the forest. And I asked myself, I was so inspired by these stories. I asked myself, why do they have these stories? It's not just to explain like natural phenomenon, right? It's a point of connection. So again, just looking at pieces that are missing and how can we integrate those pieces. It's not just about the child, it's about our deep traditions. And there's just pieces of those traditions that I think have been left out because they're more difficult. Like it's difficult to make that leap when we're not living outside. So then these creatures aren't as present in our world. Like it feels weird. Like it doesn't feel as accessible. So we just kind of go to what's safe. But when you bring a key back in, what you're bringing back is story. And kids, it's like a perfect fit. It's the perfect fit. So then, and also we're taking it out of just, again, the teacher's hands. We're here guiding you in the forest, but are we? There are other forces at play.
Yes.
There are other stories that are bigger than us. They're more mysterious than us. And to connect in that way is an invitation for the children to always look for that magic, and to take care of something that's smaller than them. We're always taking care of them, but they take care of this thing, and then they can steward the land.
Wow. I love that. Can you tell our listeners, how can they find you? How can they hear more? How can they learn more? How can they be a part of all of this amazingness?
Well, you can find me on Wilder Child on Facebook, and Wild Schooling Facebook group is at like 85,000 people. So if you're interested in homeschooling, and they can find me there. But you can also just message me, or Lakeisha, I'll give you my information. If anybody really needs help, I just contact me, and I am here to help. I'm here to support, whether it's your school traditioning, or whether it's an early education program, a daycare center, just whatever it is. Working with families and children with nature is my passion, and I want to help. So I'm available. I'm here if anyone needs anything.
All right, you guys, reach out to Nicolette. Thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait to listen back to this 10 times and learn every single time.
Thank you I am so humbled by you asking me. I was like a star asking me. I was like, oh my gosh, I got all red. My husband's like, why are you like blushing?
Well, I was just excited when I realized that I had been talking to the same person all this time who runs the Wilder Child and Wild Schooling and all these things that I've been seeing and looking at and using as resources all these years. It's so funny because it's like we have these split lives. Like, I know you as Nicolette, and I know Wilder Child for what it is, and then putting the two together was like, whoa!
Oh man!
So thank you so much. And
I admire the work you're doing. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. It is so needed, right? Just thank you.
You are welcome. And thank you everybody for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that was another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Defending the Early Years works to support the rights and needs of young children nationally. Learn more at DEY.org. Pay us a visit, sign up for our newsletter, or connect with us on social media. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.